Yeah, hey Joe. Sitting here in Singapore, we're in the midst of the third wave, right, of the pandemic of COVID-19 coming through, and we've still got 5 weeks to go on our circuit breaker, where we're basically shut down almost all businesses, very few open. Yet the U.S. is opening up now. Georgia, in particular, where you live, is really on the forefront of opening. Even a debate going on between the governor and President Trump. You lived in Singapore for 5 years, so what life is like here. Maybe explain what's happening now in Georgia, in particular, running a small business, and what we could learn from that, both good and bad, here in Singapore.
We operate in a business in what's called pet services. We're a coffee shop, dog wash, dog grooming service. So is that essential or not? And some states around the United States, pet services is essential. Others, it's not. And that was the same way in the state of Georgia. There were some cities that said pet services in that industry can operate. Others said they couldn't. So what I appreciated about the governor with the executive orders that came out, he was pretty clear in terms of what was essential. And if you weren't essential, what businesses had to cease operation. And one of the businesses that were not required to cease operation was pet services. So what we had to do, though, is we had to follow the edicts of what the president had out there and what the governor had about social distancing. And so how did we do that? We actually took a very tough look at what we do. We talked to our employees, we talked to our customers about would they be comfortable with us operating our business in the environment and the type of information that was flowing out there. And I would say by and large, the answer was yes, they were very comfortable with that. So what we had to do was, okay, how are we going to protect our employees? How are we going to protect our customers? So we immediately went to allowing no customers in our facilities at all. We did everything curbside. We had some fun with the curbside, which I'll talk about in a minute. But all of our customers, not one customer was allowed in our building. And then we set up all of our workstations were already set up. They were about 7 feet apart. And they were already dividers that were set up between the individuals that went from ceiling to floor. So we already had a work structure and a work environment where the employees could have the social distancing. Things that we couldn't do, though, was, if we had a difficult dog that required another person to come in and handle while the groomer did the cutting, we couldn't do that anymore unless they cohabitated. And we actually had a few individuals that work for us that do cohabitate. So we were able to figure out what dogs, the difficult dogs, that we had to do that so that they would be assigned to them from an operational standpoint. But the first thing, then what we also did was, we were fortunate enough because we've had some good friends there in Singapore that asked us back in January if we could order masks for them. And so we started looking at what was happening in January around what was happening with the virus. Obviously she was asking for masks, she was asking for sanitizer. So as we made orders for her and we were sending them over to Singapore, we actually doubled the order and we actually started storing those types of equipment, the PPE type equipment. We were storing those in our shop in case we needed those for future use. We do use masks, and we have used masks because you're around dog hair a lot, that blows a lot, so you always have protective gear with your face and your nose. We just wanted to make sure that we had plenty of supplies in case, particularly that at least one mask per employee every day, and that we had the supplies that would be able to cover that. And we did. So we were fortunate enough to have masks, gloves, and all the protective gear. And that was one of the requirements that required everybody to do when they came into the building. When they came in, temperature checked. Where were you last night? How do you feel? Do you feel good? If temperature was above 99, then we would ask them to leave because it was borderline. We'd ask them to touch base with us throughout the day to see how they feel. Most of it was because we are in a high pollen season this year as well. A lot of it's pollen related and sinus related. And we've not had any issues, but we did all the monitoring, we did all the checking, we gave them all the equipment. And then most importantly, we kept the customers out of the facility. We kept everything distance. So when a customer comes up to us, they pull up outside our shop and the dog's usually in the trunk or in the back seat. So we have that distance. There's nothing on the dog. There's no collars, there's no leashes, there's no clothing. And our handlers are able to get in there with gloves, with our own leashes, because we know where they are, they've been sanitized. And we're able to take the dog out, take them into the shop, get them groomed, and we do the same thing when they do a pickup. So we moved everything outside from a pickup and delivery standpoint.
Now, do you think other businesses in Georgia, or do you have any idea if they're doing as much as you're doing in terms of the safe practices and the social distancing?
That goes back to the frustration side of it is, the grocery stores. I'll use the grocery stores and the drugstores, which were essential and they could open. You would go into those and they weren't practicing any of the guidelines that were out there. There was no rhyme or reason when you went to a grocery store in terms of what the flow should be into the store and out of the store. You constantly had people crossing paths. Some had masks on, some didn't. Some had gloves on, some didn't. Even the workers within the facility didn't have the same protective gear as far as what we were doing. So we felt pretty comfortable with what we were doing. We felt that we were in a position that was a much better position than what some of these others that were required to be open and what they were doing. We did a lot of consultation with our veterinary partners to make sure that we were following the same guidelines and we weren't missing anything. But in terms of, as a small business owner, I mean, I will tell you, back in March when this was starting to evolve, you do have a lot of sleepless nights. You do really wonder, are we going to be able to operate tomorrow? We have 35 employees. What do I do? I have enough cash. Do I have enough cash flow on hand to be able to sustain paying them a decent salary without putting them on unemployment, to be able to pay the rent? We were able to figure that out for about 3 months. But then after that, then what? I think we were a little bit fortunate from that standpoint versus some of the other businesses. Unfortunately, there's going to be a lot of businesses that aren't going to reopen. And I think that's where the frustration with the small business community is, in terms of being able to get the resources and the access to experts and the information so that they can operate their business. And I do think that's why I think it weighs on someone like the governors. It does weigh on them. I mean, we talked about the coronavirus, we talk about the potential deaths, but on the flip side, there's many people that die of suicide, drug addiction, alcoholism, which is on par with what they're predicting on the corona side. How are you going to account for that? 26 million people out of work today. That other side of the equation, I would expect to see some type of an increase there. So how do you weigh that type of an illness and potential harm that can happen versus the virus? And I think it's very, these politicians are in a very difficult situation. They have to weigh that. Let alone, the revenue that's required to operate the states and things like that. It's going to be diminished. So,
And one of the concerns that people have is, if you open up the businesses, and yours has been essential, so it's been open, but you open up some, but then you have to close them again because you get that second wave come in, and then you have that yo-yo effect. Are people worried about having, opening too soon, and not taking all the precautions you're taking, and then having an even worse economic impact because now people are going back and forth and up and down?
that's a great question. I mean, what I'm seeing in talking to those that I'm around on a daily basis, I've been in touch with a lot of small business owners over the past couple of weeks. They're very cautious, and they're going to take a cautious approach. What they appreciate about what the Governor Kemp did, was that he gave them the ability to open if they want. Nobody's forcing them to be open. Nobody's forcing the customers to go into those establishments, even if they are open. But if they are, they've got the freedom and the ability to do that. And that's, as that's what makes the United States unique. You've got this thing called the Bill of Rights that you have to follow. They don't go away in these types of situations. So how do you balance those freedoms that we all have as Americans? How do you balance that in these types of situations? And I do think what Kemp did right was he gave it as an option. If you want to open, open. But if you're going to open, you've got to follow these standards. And we went through the same thing when we knew that we could open. It wasn't that I could operate freely. I had to follow the certain policies and procedures. We've had 4 inspections. We've had 3 by the city, different city enforcement officers that have come in, and 1 by the Georgia State Police, where they came in to make sure that we were practicing what the governor was putting in place. So it's not like you're able to do it freely. They will come, they will check at some point in time to see if you're doing those things that are in accordance with the executive orders that are out there by the governor and by the president.